like in Poland, for example, if you take peace, for example, they hijacked left-wing agenda for the conservative purpose.
Dear friends, welcome for a next piece of our series of online debates that we started during the crisis time. I am delighted to have with me today Professor Šarunas Liekis from Lithuania, who has a long and distinguished academic record with his core agenda, core area of interest being democratic rights of, in particular, minorities in society, and he worked on some historical aspects of it, but also much more currently how human rights, more in general, are doing during these times, and we want to talk about this area as a core area of Forum 2000, and with this we actually want to move a little bit from directly talking about the virus only. And the last thing I'm going to say for the introduction, Professor Liekis is not only an academic, but he held a number of international positions, most notably, I believe, in the European Commission against discrimination and intolerance. I hope I'm not telling it too badly, and with this I think we can move to the real discussion. Professor Liekis, welcome once again. Thanks for being with us, and I already indicated the topic in the introduction. You have been watching the virus crisis unfolding in your part of Europe, in Lithuania and perhaps the neighborhood, and I think you can make some interesting conclusions on what it has meant for some of these old problems and tensions and so on. So are we in a new place now with the virus and after the virus than we were before, or is it back to normal?
I think we're getting to normal. I mean, this is my at least feeling and impression, and from my colleagues at least, from everybody around, there is this understanding that everybody wants to go back to normal, because all the means which are using, or let's say even during our conversation, Zoom, all the means for communication, all the means for distance learning, everybody got tired of it. I have the feeling. Everybody is complaining. Everybody wants to see, the live people, and depends very much on the situation in one country or another country. It's peculiarities of the countries, but overall, I think there is kind of fatigue, for quarantine, and fatigue for distance learning, and fatigue for communicating the way we are communicating even now. So the people seem that they need this kind of human touch, with everything. It's much easier to agree. It's much easier to discuss issues. I mean, even the Council of Europe, we spoke here about, when you were introducing me about the Council of Europe. So we would have, different meetings in different formats, especially like on general policy recommendations. But still, you can do these things because, the partners on the other side, and you used to work with them in a normal way before. So when you have this kind of format, then, you can discuss, you can arrange things, and you can even be kind of productive producing, the change, producing the normative documents, etc., etc. But if you see the people, behind the screen the first time, probably, it will take 3-4 times, longer to do this or that. And naturally, when we speak about having normal or not normal, or saying that this abnormal present situation can become new normal, usually I'm joking for the students, saying that we cannot fly with the parachute. This is a parachute, and we need a plane. So this. And very often there is a tendency and there is a willingness, especially on those who are managing technical part of our life, especially different IT departments, etc. So usually they are very happy, to start running our lives and making out of our parachute, a plane, though it's not flying. It's just going down.
Okay. Well, true. The crisis is a crisis in the sense that we need to deal with the challenge. But there have been some people suggesting that actually, instead of going back to the normal before, we should create a new normal, yes, with new energy, a new engine if you want, but this should be a stimulus. That's the optimists. But more often than that, you have the pessimists who say that the crisis has actually deepened and aggravated all the conflicts, if it is geopolitics or other types of tensions and competition and so on. And that what was going bad before is now turning even worse or in an accelerated way. Would you say that this is the same for the specific issues that you focus on? Again, being relations between minorities in society and the tensions and so on. So again, with these issues, are we on the downward trend, or has something perhaps even improved?
No, I think its general tendency is that the issues of human rights, at least in one another country, I think, if we, for example, speak about Lithuania, I mean, the issues of human rights, issues of participation, naturally, there were all kinds of limits put on the people on their day-to-day activities. But speaking in probably also depends very much on kind of, is the population discipline prone? They are not disciplined. Like, we saw many examples in Europe where you had, like Italians, for example, till the last moment celebrating and kissing each other, before outbreak of pandemics. Before the formal quarantine, or you have much more kind of distancing themselves, much kind of quieter attitude. So, for example, I think generally, like in the northeastern Europe, I mean, at least here, so the people, took this quarantine kind of as a normal procedure. It was not very difficult in terms of everyday, routines. Also, the countries here are sparsely populated, so it's not densely populated. And naturally, this kind of understanding and indoctrination by the authorities that you need to have quarantine. You have to distance. You socially have to be distanced from from your neighbors, friends, relatives, etc., etc. Because it took some time to understand this, I mean, it went rather smoothly. And I think if we speak about the Baltics generally, right now, the Baltics, I think, opened one of the first in Europe. So they have the so-called Baltic bubble, where, we are traveling already nearly 1 month between Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia and travel. You don't need to be quarantined or to sit in isolation, at home after going somewhere. And Poland joined, last week, so from the 12th. So they end this bubble, so we are not so lonely, you can go to somewhere else, to Riga or to Warsaw. So this is not so bad, I mean, from day-to-day activities. But when we're speaking about more serious issues, human rights and participation, naturally participation went down. People need for normal participation, gatherings, meetings, agitation, etc., etc. So naturally, not having all this, the activities went down, and a certain level of anxiety and frustration went up, and especially among those who were politically active. Because naturally, everybody started to treat that the government, the present government, and the present majority in the parliament is capitalizing on virus, on pandemic, and because they have all the attention, they have cameras focused on them, and the rest of the parliament members or politicians, they're out of the game. So anxiety, I think, in opposition and is high, and naturally this kind of political anxiety creates additional tensions when it comes to the human rights as well, because even the smallest thing can become of great importance, and to sound and to look really big, just simply because of all these IT bubbles, or social media bubbles, because people are sitting in social media. He has 300 followers. Everybody enjoys him and he enjoys them, so everybody is like busting and, boiling in this bubble. So I think there is a lot of psychology in this. It's not only the issues of being discriminated or somehow persecuted, for one thing or another thing, what you like to do and what or what you promote in your life. But the issue, I think, is it has a lot of to do with psychology, being in social isolation, in seclusion, and not being able to express yourself in a normal way. And so it puts a lot of pressure on people.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Thank you for this. It's interesting to hear that many of the perceptions are the same in your country as elsewhere in this part of Europe. When you talked about the governments, no, who are actually kind of automatically scoring points because they are those seen as solving the crisis, the people in action, whereas the opposition only sits back. By definition, we've seen that, I guess, more or less across the board. I think, in if not in all, then very most cases, the popularity of government has during this time risen. And that brings temptations with it, as you also indicated, namely to try to use or abuse that sort of position for imposing a less open, less democratic regime. I wonder now if I should name one country or shouldn't, but there was this one country where the government proposed, of course, an unlimited state of emergency and so on. So hopefully we'll pass through this without harm to the systems that we have, the democratic systems. But if I may ask you, until recently, and with this we are getting country-specific and quite concrete, which I think we should, until recently, a year ago or so, Lithuania was criticized to some extent in the field of human rights, where it comes to family rights, reproductive rights, and their guarantees or lack thereof. Some critics linked this to the position of the Lithuanian Catholic Church and so on. So I think some independent reports voiced concerns in that respect, that I think it's connected also to the LGBT marriages and so on, that Lithuania was falling behind in these aspects. It's also linked to things like family violence, with so much kind of intouchability of the family that some things are looked through or not reported and so on. Is this still the situation? How has that been developing?
Okay, so I will start from that and from the family issues and violence, in the near, circles in the family. I think during this COVID, what we noticed, and I spoke with some law enforcement, and I had some interesting information that during COVID, actually, violence at home, and in families was on increase. And especially during, social isolation, the first weeks during the social isolation, people, and the rate of divorces and everything else, increased, and plus the violence. And also not only men against women, but also women against men. So this was, increased. Probably the men were getting on the nerves, of the women at home, sitting at home, etc. So the divorce rates, violence, so everything went on increase. A few years ago, when we started, when Lithuania started to be noticed for the increase of violence in the families, Actually, this was related to the change of legislation, where basically police was obliged to report and to visit in case of home violence. Before, for example, if husband, let's take, it's like he shouts on his wife or beats her or whatever, they would very often would say, this is a family issue. We don't get, or for example, children and parents, the child gets slapped, and so right now, after these changes 2 years ago, more right now, already 4 years ago, basically they started to report. So, and police was first, they were like in very desperate, and basically they were trying somehow to avoid these new obligations, but it didn't work. And why it didn't work? Basically, they were overloaded with the work in the families. Suddenly, they never did it before. Right now, the report rate was very high. So this is, the background of the Lithuanian situation with violence, in the family. When it comes to the LGBT reproductive and also reproductive rights and influence of the Catholic Church actually, it's interesting that the present government, which is from 2016, is so-called Peasant and Green Party, which is, I would say, more not left-leaning. Right now, they started to lean left, from 2019, this government. They became very center-left. More than the Social Democrats. Actually, they hijacked social agenda from political left. It's
popular tactics.
Yeah, like in Poland, for example, if you take Peace, for example, they hijacked left-wing agenda for the conservative purpose. The same was with Lithuania. The Greens, which is actually Lithuanian Greens, are this kind of Peasant and Green alliance, is a conservative alliance. Traditionally, there is a small left-leaning separate Green Party, which is kind of progressive, etc., etc. This the present ruling party and coalition has few partners. One of them is, for example, Polish electoral campaign. Polish political party, a regional party, which is very conservative, like Peace in Poland. So they are the partners of the Greens and Peasants. And actually, they're putting a lot of this anti-LGBT also when it comes to reproductive rights. They put a lot of this into their agenda. Because traditionally in Lithuania, this political force, the Peasant and Green Party, was kind of neo-pagan more than than the Catholic. So they are sneaking in through this partnership with the Polish regional party. They sneak in this kind of Catholic agenda. Actually, opposition, the Conservative Party, is more connected with the Catholic Church and with their priorities and the issues behind, let's say, which is important for the Catholic establishment. And also in Lithuania, if to compare with Poland, Poland is more, let's say, strict in terms of following confessional, line, let's say, being pro-Catholic. In Lithuania, traditionally, there is this, let's say, this rather secular element, and also the Protestants are making big difference here because they're big, the Protestant, like part of middle class. They're rather strong, and they usually opposed all the kinds of Catholic, so-called Catholic tricks, so it's usually they are like kind of in opposition to the Catholic agenda tradition. So usually they politically they balance because they are well established and part of the establishment among, let's say, creative professions, journalists, especially universities as well. So they have a strong presence. So they usually outbalance the Catholic hardliners agenda. When it comes to in vitro, for example, issues or reproductive rights, they didn't touch upon the abortions. There was some small limits, put, about the first, before abortion, for example, you have to have a psychologist, consultation. It's required. Before it was never required. Or, for example, they opened the gates for in vitro. Before, for example, the main center for in vitro in the Baltics was Riga, Latvia. So all women would go to Riga instead actually from Poland and Lithuania as well. So because of all these limits put on. So actually, in reality, when they saw that it's, put into technologically, in terms of medical technologies, puts the whole system in disadvantage. So they basically, the present coalition, actually, they opened the gates for in vitro, from every, in every respect. So it became much, so basically the ruling Social Democrats, which were ruling from 2012 to 2016, they were much more conservative in this respect. Because they listen and follow their opponents, the Conservative Party, and the Catholics would make greater influence on them. Because this new party, they are not new, they are long party, party having long tradition, this Christian peasant and green party. But they never had, substantial presence in the parliament.
Maybe
it's the first time when they have absolute majority. They have nearly constitutional majority, so they can do whatever they. So right now they don't care. So one of the first steps what they did was on reproductive rights in 2016. So they took away.
Interesting.
They are not for LGBT. They are not going, for example, in the direction of legalizing partnerships. But they don't object to this. For example, if the partnerships are made somewhere in Spain or wherever, nobody makes,
Okay, maybe let me pick it from this, because I think the time is also nearing its end. Thank you for these insights, and for the conclusion, I would like to ask you one more question. If we are already talking these things, religious, less religious, progressive, and obviously the government is going in the progressive direction, but being with the religions, one thing that you worked a lot on in your career, I know, is the Jewish population of Lithuania, which historically was very significant, large, it had up and downs. Of course, some moments in that history were very, very troubled. So I would be really interested in knowing where this is now. Is there still such a significant, strong and vocal Jewish part of the population which participates in the whole public debate, less or more, and which perhaps, for example, also talks to the international developments like what is going on in the Middle East now and in Israel specifically? So is it still a big phenomenon, the Lithuanian Jews, in this sense?
Actually, when we speak demographically, we're speaking about a few thousand people. So and in terms of real politics, they don't make difference. However, when it comes to the so-called politics of memory, how you're dealing with the genocide, how you're dealing with the past, genocidal past, okay, quote unquote, how you commemorate suffering, so how you commemorate Holocaust, all these things are coming to the forefront of so-called memory, politics. So the Jewish aspect is very important from that point of view, because then, the question of heroes, of villains, these issues become very important and sometimes very worrying, because, once again, when it comes into the political field, there are those who, try very often, especially, for example, like Lithuanian Conservative Party, and Vytautas Landsbergis is one of the figures which is known in the West, but he is with the Conservative Party, which is very often trying somehow to reconcile the narrative with the Nazi collaborators narrative. In a sense, the national narrative, to move the pro-Nazi collaborators narrative into the national narrative. So the Conservative Party, which is right now in opposition, and because they're in opposition, so they don't have much right now to say. This for them, because many of these issues also are made at the unsolved or discussed at the municipal level. So sometimes it depends, on the politics of the municipality, the city councils.
Yeah.
And it depends very much who is majority, who is in minority. But the issues which are related to the memory and the issues related to the Holocaust, I mean, they're also important in the discussions which are ongoing about the role of the Soviet Union for the matter of Russia, monuments, commemoration, it overlaps. Holocaust, the role of the Soviet Union, present-day Russian claims, it's like in Prague, this Konev, monument and the whole scandal, So similar situations, and the Jewish issues here, because of the relatively big presence, around 8-9% of the population before the Second World War, predominance in the small city towns, the role in business, etc., etc. So it's not only historical issue. Right now, it became the political issue, because of the politics of memory, not because of the real presence of the Jews here. I mean, there is a presence of the Jews. The attitude, I think, is relaxed. For example, if you look at Jewish gymnasium in Vilnius, for example, there is a Jewish gymnasium. So 2/3 of the students are not Jewish. So it shows that everybody feels rather comfortable to be, let's say, in the Jewish establishment, to work with, to live with, etc., etc. So it's not an issue. But once you get into the political field, then especially when it comes to the questions of heroes and villains, and when we discuss the past, who is right and who is not right, then we run into the problem.
Right, and I'm getting signals that the time is up. We should wrap it up. So thank you indeed. We have gone through a couple of issues to see how it looks in Lithuania and neighborhood after the crisis, and whether everything will be the same or not. So many questions remain, obviously. And once again, thank you for your insights, and we hope to be in touch for the future.
Thank you very much. And so if you have any questions, always welcome to ask, So.
Wonderful. Thank you. Bye-bye.